everyone, this is Soraya, back with Purpose of Professional Media, and today I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Mayra Tenorio. Mayra is an impassioned advocate and leader for women. She currently runs leadership development for the Vital Voices Foundation. She is such a warm soul and someone who is genuinely motivated to empower all women. Her whole episode radiates a sense of women's empowerment, from mentioning her mother and the women that raised her, to her gender studies coursework and research, even to the work she does in women's leadership development and facilitation. From balancing dreams of academia for women's justice to traveling around the world and working with women in diverse contexts, Myra's story is for the books. It literally is a storybook. Let's hop into this episode and learn more about this amazing women leader, advocate, and guest. Hello, everybody. This is Soraya from the Purpose Professional Podcast, and we are back. This time, we are back with an amazing guest. She was the leader of Vital Voices Fellowship. She's one of the coordinators at Vital Voices for that fellowship, and someone that I really admire from afar. I really admire her leadership, her facilitation skills, and I'm super excited to have such a powerful advocate for women internationally, not even just women in the United States, but women internationally on the podcast. So I'm super excited to introduce Mayra Tenorio. Mayra, introduce yourself to the people on the podcast.
Hi. Well, what a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much, Soraya. Yes, my name is Mayra, and really excited to be here and supporting now your initiative. I'm on the other side of it. This is great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. So we like to do a segment with all of our guests called Pop Purpose, where we want to discuss a pop culture topic relevant to your area of expertise. I believe that all of the guests y'all are amazing people, and we need to not only hear your story, but also your perspectives. So today we're going to discuss Shakira finding the Barbie movie emasculating. Now, coming off of Women's History Month, everybody knows that the Barbie movie was, I don't even want to say it was a feminist movement. It was a feminist moment last year, and something that we all are still celebrating and even resonating with today. However, Shakira recently said that she found the Barbie movie emasculating for her young sons. So I want to get kind of into a conversation on that. My first question for you is, did you watch the Barbie movie, or like what were some themes or occurrences in the movie that like resonated with you, or some that probably didn't resonate as much?
Yeah, I watched the movie actually twice, and there were definitely some things that resonated with me. I think the movie did a good job of, especially like when Barbie enters the real world, I think the shock that sometimes women can experience and just kind of living a day-to-day of dealing with, harassment or just people's assumptions about you and stereotypes. And I think the movie also did a good job of uplifting women and showing different women and the diversity that exists in that way. Um, but there were definitely other things that I think just for me, they didn't land as well as maybe they did for other people. Um, Especially, I think once it shifted to Ken, like going back to Barbie Land and bringing patriarchy, I didn't find that funny at all. Like I found it almost triggering and really upsetting to watch. And so I think just that, like I couldn't really just get out of the mindset of this is horrible. Like Barbie just lost her house. Like she's been kicked out. And just things like that. Like I don't know, I couldn't really get to it. And then the other aspect that I also did not I thought was a bit too simplistic and didn't like was when they almost made it seem like, oh, if women are just told that they are it's like women are blind and they just need to be told that they don't, they can stand up for themselves. And then that's it. Then that will solve patriarchy. Like it almost put it on us as if it's women are suffering under patriarchy and it's almost our choice because we have just not been illuminated. And so I thought it really did not put the blame on the structure and kind of these larger power dynamics and systems in that way. So those were kind of the two things that that left the most impression on me when it came to the Barbie movie.
Yeah, wow. I think those are amazing impressions to have. Those are amazing thoughts to have on the movie as well. I also agree, like there were certain aspects of the movie that were triggering to me. I think the Ken thing was triggering because I mean, there's a whole movement on the internet of men saying that, you know, women have gotten too far and we need to take back power and we need to do this or that. And I think what Ken's behavior represented a lot of that, like, oh, we need to take back power from women and kind of like just this reactive nonsense. But I also understand your take, and I think it was so nuanced about like, is it really women? Is it really our fault that we're in the situation that we're in? And I think you're referencing America Ferrara's character giving the women the pep talk, like, oh, I'm gonna give you the pep talk, sis. And all of a sudden you're gonna have the power to go out there and just challenge the systems that essentially, you know, result in your marginalization. So you're right. It was a simplistic view. It wasn't a complex view or even a realistic view in general. But I think it was fun. Like it was fun fodder for people, but it wasn't as like, you're right. It could have been more thoughtful. My next question for you is like, how did the movie like align with or even relate to your current understanding of feminism? Or how did it reinforce your own beliefs or even challenge them?
I think the movie was a good representation of, I think, like a feminist. I think feminism in the US specifically over the past few years has been kind of co opted by companies, and it has become just very simplistic. And it's very much about kind of women power and like uplifting femininity. And that's fine and great, but there has been just this larger disconnection of it being a political movement, of it being having this long history of being tied to communities, different types of communities in the US and across the world. So in that sense, I think it's very representative of, I think it, like even when I speak to friends or in general, I think there's a sense in the US of, yeah, like we all know feminism is great. And like, yeah, women's power, women should have rights. Yeah. But it's almost as if everybody agrees. And it's kind of like, yeah, we don't have to worry about it anymore. Whereas if because I've learned from other feminist women in other countries, I think there's still a need of urgency in other places. And feminism is still rooted in organizing and community in a way that it's not in the US. So, in that sense, it is, I think, very representative of my understanding of that movement here and what more could be done, I would say. So, the movie, I think what you were hinting at is that it's a great introduction for the general public or a lot of different people. And I think because of that, different people can get different things out of it. But yeah, it's just a movie. Like I don't think it will have like a really long, long impactful kind of movement coming out of it. I mean, I don't think other than pink, pink being everywhere, unfortunately, we're not continuing to have those conversations in the way that other movements like Me Too did have a long lasting impact in all aspects of society and like politics.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the truth. That's just the facts. And I think it gives it's a bubblegum feminism, like almost like, you know, I'm gonna make it palatable for you to understand it versus actually go into the issues. And I think as we get into the question about Shakira, the last question in in this section, there's really different realities around feminism in different places. I think a part of why it was triggering for people too is because when you see a group of women not understanding that compared to the entire world, how privileged American women are in general, it gives kind of like a tone deaf. It can give a tone deaf perspective almost. So I think you could tell who the writers were. I'm just gonna leave it at that. You could kind of tell who shaped the narrative, and Mattel at the end of the day is a corporation, so they're working to promote their brand and build their brand. So a lot of it was like we're trying to build a brand versus, like you said, like understanding the roots of feminism. And you referenced Me Too, and Me Too is like, I would say out of the last, even in the turn of the century, that's been like a powerful like grassroots feminist movement that made its way to Hollywood, but really started like trying to address sexual assault in urban and minority communities in the United States. Like I think like there are, like you said, there are pressing issues and parts of this that the movie didn't even touch on. to be honest. And it just kind of gave that, we're going to make it appropriate and we're going to make it fun. But you're right, like it opens the way and should open the way for deeper discussion. So I liked that. Okay. So now we got this spicy question on Shakira. And I would love to know, like, in your experience, do you think Shakira's beliefs reflect those of Latin American culture pertaining to issues of feminism or even femininity and masculinity?
That is a big question. And I don't know if I can speak to, all of Latin America, but I think what's really interesting about her perspective and her what she was saying about the movie being emasculating to her boys. A lot of, I read the article and I'm like referencing my notes here. I think it's interesting that a lot of the concern from her end seemed to be like, yes, women should be, we should empower women, but they should still be feminine. And, yes, boys should respect women, but they should still be providers and caretakers. And in general, if you look at the main concern or a lot of the backlash that like a lot of men or just people in general have towards feminism or women's rights movement is this concern about, well, what's going to happen to men? Like, what about us? And like in she kept talking about we're robbing men of their identity and like men should have a purpose. So I think it's interesting that there is this fear of men of, well, if I can't be a quote unquote traditional man, then what am I? And I think that is indicative of the difference between what feminism is really trying to argue, not just for women, but for everybody, which is that gender roles don't encompass all that people can be and that they're very limiting. And that if we actually try to break down those categories and just reimagine how we could relate to one another, then we can all be free. And so I think that is what is missing from a lot of conversations, especially those that try to engage men, right? There's a lot of, I mean, fun fact, I used to study, like, be really into masculinity studies in college. So this is actually a question that I've thought a lot about. But there's a lot of, movements and programs aimed at men and you know, breaking down quote unquote toxic masculinity. But I think what is often missing from those is a real reflection or a real critique around what even is masculinity? Why is the category of men necessary? Like, this is what the feminist movement has done for decades. But these men movements still don't do that. And so I think until they do that, they are just trying to, it won't get at the core of, again, what is power and how is this harming everybody.
That's a powerful take. I knew you were gonna have a great take. I knew you were gonna have a great take on that question. That's why I was like, okay, that's the hot button question I wanted to ask you. No, that's a powerful, powerful take, and I think it speaks to the fact that you're right. Like, I think like what feminism is trying to do at its core is deconstruct these gender roles to give people the freedom to, if a woman decides, for example, she wants a life of, being a high powered businesswoman and not having kids and not being married, like she should have the right to that. Just as much as if a man decides he wants to be a stay at home father or even play a traditional caretaking role, he has the right to that. So I think I love Shakira's music, but I was kind of like, okay, this is why sometimes when our celebrities speak on politics, it comes across a certain way. I do think she meant well, but it more so was rather her preference than actual, like, okay, the society should be like this. I think she was more so speaking from her perspective, and she was also speaking from a, if we got to keep it real, her own point of view, which, she might in her relationships prefer to see men play a certain role, but men can play so many different roles in the society. And I think I agree with you, it's kind of sad that she actually even limited her sons to thinking, if a woman is in charge, because the Barbie movie showed women being in charge, you're being emasculated against. That's crazy to me. love her music, but it also was like, this is just a juicy take. I don't know if you saw the tweets, but people were just all over the place in the responses. And I do think that you're right. Like, I think like we have to think at the core of like, why do we do this work? You talked about masculinity studies. Like, why is this study? Because I think by now we should understand that we can evolve past what society's expectations for us are, and like you said, like learn to relate to each other in new ways. So I really do appreciate that very, very thoughtful perspective. All right, so now we're going to get into our people section. Thank you for that, like, great introduction conversation. And one thing we like to focus on with this podcast is who you are as a person, but your career, and then also the culture. One thing I say all the time is that our past, right? The seeds of our past become the trees of our future. So oftentimes when I talk to people, I recognize that they didn't just become who they've become. Experiences have shaped them, their personality shapes them, their values, their interests. So the people section really talks a lot about who you are as a person and how that has shaped you. In our pre-call, you told me that you were raised by women, and I think that's always a powerful like statement to say. I love when people say that. How did this like female-centric upbringing prepare you for a life of advocating for and empowering women?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything, right? I yeah, so I grew up in Mexico and I lived in a house with my grandparents and my aunts, my cousins, and yeah, for different familial and just cultural reasons, um, it was really women who were the ones that were always there, always solving problems, always, bringing money to the household. And, it wasn't really something that um, it was something that I was aware of and I knew, um, but it was almost, at times, I think it was sad to almost think that this is this was normal and perhaps this was the future for me as well, of sort of having to fend for myself. I think when I saw my mom, right, it was like her against the world with not a lot of support, and also having to lean on me, sometimes, even though I was really young, to kind of share her burdens. And I mean, and that's just, it's sad, right? It's sad and unfair. But at the same time, right, I was always so proud of my mom, and she is, even now, my hero in so many ways, and the inspiration for all the things that I do. And also everything that I have been able to accomplish was because of her and all of her efforts and just our family, just figuring things out. And so I think I mentioned that it was, once as I got older and went to college and started I took my first women's studies class. It was the first time that I kind of gained the language of understanding my life, through this vocabulary, um, with theory and history. But it was my mom's life and all the life of the women that I had seen, and like the stories that I knew, that really made that theory really come to life. And I think that was a big motivator of then, you know, what I want to do. And, wouldn't it be great if I can not only for myself, have a different life, have a life that is more free with more opportunities, but also how can I share that and create paths and opportunities for other women to also do that?
Wow. No, I felt that in my soul because I think like one of the books that I'm reading is We Should All Be Millionaires by Rachel Rogers. And she talks a lot about how like when women achieve wealth, the wealth is redistributed to the entire community. And I think what you're saying about like how your mother's strength was able to carry you and the strength of the women in your life as well, I think that's wonderful because I think that speaks to the testament of women and the testament to the fact that women are really the backbone of the society. A lot of people, you know this, but a lot of people don't know this. So thank you for sharing like the fact that that upbringing instilled in you a desire to try to understand, I guess, like how women could be better championed, because you saw the strength of women. You saw the strength of your mother, as well as the strength that was unlocked in you, having to also, be there for her and be there for your family. So that's beautiful, and I think it's a testament to the fact that we as women are so strong, and not in a bad way, like, oh, we can handle things by ourselves, but no, like we provide the fabric of society, and I think that's a wonderful way that wonderful introduction as well to your women's studies aspirations. So I really do want to know, how did like your women's studies experiences like transform the lens through which you viewed your community, your upbringing, and then also like the women in your life?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, it definitely gave me first the vocabulary. And I mean, it's funny. I think when I first took that, my first class, I thought, "Oh my gosh, all the answers are here." Like I just need to share it with the world. And then you realize, well, no, right? Um, that is not the purpose of academia or theory. But it was through that then it really widened my understanding of a lot of issues. And obviously also I knew my experience and the experience of my mom and the like Latina immigrant community in Chicago in the suburbs. But then that was really expanded of, well, what does it mean to be a different type of immigrant in the US? What does it mean to be, a Black woman? What does it mean to be somebody who's differently abled, somebody who lives in rural spaces, um, and in different parts of the world? And I think, that is also something that became really foundational later on as I did a lot of traveling, or conducted research abroad, because it really taught me, well, how do you approach, and even as you said it, how can I really understand other women's lives while still respecting that other women, they already have the answers. They know what problems they have, and they have ideas for how to solve them. They just don't have oftentimes the resources or even the ability to implement those solutions. And so, and so and so that I think was really transformative, and wouldn't have happened, had I not really gone to college and been in these classes that just like completely opened and expanded my understanding of how I saw the world. And even, I think when I think of gender studies, the reason why I kept taking those classes was because they were the hardest classes I had ever taken, because they were challenging even my own understanding of the world, like because I grew up in the same world, right, with different expectations around what it meant to be a woman for me, and who I was going to be. So I had never even questioned these things for myself. And so it was so difficult going through that process of like, gaining the feminist lenses and now viewing the world totally differently. And so navigating that, I just and really loved and enjoyed that process, but it was difficult. And I grew a lot through that. And I'm so thankful for, all of my teachers and peers who shared their experiences and all these different resources and allowed me to see that.
You're speaking facts, because I took like one gender studies course in college and it challenged me a lot. I remember the first time I heard the term male identified, I didn't know what that was. And then I was like, oh, snap. So, literally, how our feminine selves are oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes developed with masculinity in mind. And I went down a rabbit hole of like, this is nuts. Like, it teaches you a different way of relating to the world, and like how we exist in the world as women. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. So I remember like leaving one day and I was like, wait, is everything we do because of men? Like, I couldn't understand. I was like, my professor's telling me, like, is everything we do because of men and masculinity ultimately? And I was like, wow, like mind blown. And not to say that the world should be that way, but for many women, that's the dominant narrative. in our minds. And I was like, wow, like it blew my mind. So I think like that's I can attest to the fact that for me, it was only one chorus, but it really gave me even the language to understand. All right, like when you see certain things, you know where it's coming from. Like, you know, the thing behind the thing. And I think a lot of the time, I feel like sometimes we're more advanced even in the area of racial equity than we are with the gender equity, just because sometimes we're afraid to, having intersectional identities teaches you, like, sometimes we're afraid to call out the issues relating to women just because they're so oftentimes pervasive and oftentimes not as obvious as like the racial issue. Like I'm in DEI, so I can say like, hey, like you're discriminating against this person because they're, Asian American or etc. And people kind of understand that to a certain level. But I think sometimes the atrocities done against women are not always obvious. And the course taught me that a lot of the way that we even are taught to relate to each other in society as men and women, it's deep. So I understand what you're saying, because like I experienced that. I was like, oh, this is deep. I never even thought of my decisions being motivated by masculinity. Like I never thought of that. And I was like, now I go back to like the women in my life and even me, some decisions that we made. Um, thinking of like the patriarchal society in mind and like trying to fit into that. So those are those classes where you better be ready. Like you better be ready for the conversations, because the conversations are always crazy. And I think with Vital Voices, we were able to get to some of those conversations as well, which I really love. We were able to introduce some of that, like how we show up at work, how we show up as leaders, how much of that has been influenced by the dominant society. And women always just like, I like to say the patriarchy, like throwing it around, but it's true. Like how much of how we operate has been influenced by that. And I think that those classes got me in that mindset. I would love to know for you, like, was there like one thing, like one theory or concept or framework like that you think really resonated with your own lived experiences?
I mean, what came up as you were talking was um, really the topic of intersectionality and how there are all of these different everything is interrelated. And so, yes, gender is in everything, but it interacts with other things, such as race and class, and immigration status. So maybe that was one of the, I think, most like captivating concepts, which isn't necessarily in feminism, but it became, I think, an integral. So there's like different waves to feminism when it comes to kind of its history. Third wave feminism was really impacted by intersectionality, and in trying to understand, well, you know, how can we have not just one feminism, but feminisms that is aware and responsive to all of the different um, realities that impact, different women. Because maybe that's also something that, I mean, going back to the Barbie movie, right? It was kind of this perfect world where all women love each other and support one another. And that has been like an ongoing, and even now an ongoing conversation. And not to, I mean, I really dislike when people just make offhand comments of, oh well, women don't support each other. I think it's, when it comes to this specific conversation, I think it's more about how women live very different lives depending on who they are and where they are and what their realities are. And in order to be better allies, and in order for all of us to be free, we have to be aware of those differences and be willing to continue to learn and push back. And so one of the other reasons why I also have always really loved feminist spaces or feminist communities is because they really challenge you. You have to kind of know that you're going to have and make some wrong assumptions, and that you don't know everything, and that you may say something that is invisibilizing somebody else. And so those spaces can be very humbling in that way, and can teach you how to really be a good listener. Um, yeah, and again, it's just it pushes you to approach your relationship to others differently. And it's just such a valuable tool set that, especially now in our world and here in the US specifically, it's really important.
Yeah, no, I feel you on that 100%. I 100% feel you on that and understand exactly what you're saying because the intersections is really where you get into the nitty-gritty of the experience. And you also begin to realize that no two women have the same experience in life. Like you said, like race, gender, and class. I don't know if it was Angela Davis who wrote like race, women, and class. It's always been this thing of like there are layering identities, but I think like the word intersectionality gave us the language for being able to explain like, hey, like my experience is different because I'm the daughter of immigrants, and I grew up middle class in New York, et cetera, et cetera. And even then, wealth is relative too. Class is relative. So it's so complicated in like our experiences, but I totally 100% understand what you're saying, and I also admire your ability to put it so eloquently into words that that is something that is very, transformative, for women and also formative for women. When you were out speaking, I was thinking a lot about, the fact that there's this feminism versus womanism thing, and when I was in college, I heard a lot of women that looked like me, not calling themselves feminists, but calling themselves womanist, and then I started realizing I was like, okay, let me just Google, like, 'cause I don't really know the language. And I realized that womanism was like this reaction of like certain women who felt like feminism didn't necessarily represent them. And apparently, I'm not a gender studies scholar, but like womanism encompassing more of like the family and the community and different things. And going back to what you said about like based on how you look, even the way that our lives end up, I feel like certain women, feminism is so much more than just women. It's children, it's access to education, it's even also to the benefit of men, right? To the benefit of the men in the community, because of if the women do better, the entire community will do better. And I think everyone doesn't have that experience, so certain people couldn't understand why certain people called themselves womanist. And even to this day, I don't necessarily understand that. I don't know if you'd be able to shed light on that, but I always heard some people say womanist, womanist, womanist. And I think that made me realize, okay, even within this umbrella, there are different experiences. There are different things that we call ourselves based on how we react and relate to what is happening around us.
Yeah. I mean, my understanding of this term womanist or womanism, I think, is that it did come out of Black women in the US who did not feel that the feminist movement at that time was inclusive of their experience. Um, and so I think it's important to understand its like historical origin and what was its purpose. Um, because my understanding is that's where it came from. And even now, I think maybe not so much in the US, but definitely in other parts of the world, a lot of women still don't relate to this word feminism. To a lot of them, it feels like it's like a quote unquote Western term or something that it's not applicable to them or representative of them and their culture. And I think it's it's fair to I can understand where that comes from, but I do think it's a misrepresentation. Not to say that feminism, it's gone through its stages and there's always things that we can do better. But yeah, I think you're right that feminism is for everyone. And what I was going to say earlier as well is that intersectionality was also a tool that there's a lot of, oftentimes in communities of color, and I don't know if you experienced this, the reaction or sort of backlash to women advocating, for Black women or, rights for Latina women or Asian women, there's backlash from men in their community saying, well, men are not the enemy, or you are dividing us. and and so intersectionality was really a tool to say, you cannot, like I cannot divorce my womanhood from my race or my culture. And, you are wrong in saying that by bringing up, for instance, gender-based violence, in, you know, this space, that like I am like a race traitor or whatever. So, I mean, I guess now I've just gone on a tangent, but like getting back to this term, I think just that is probably the difference. I think it's that different histories and different associations with different terms, different women feel more represented by them, and there is some historical truth to that. Um, but again, at the end of the day, I don't think it ideally it shouldn't divide us. Ideally, it should create conversation around, well, how can we create spaces that are more inclusive to all types of women and their lived experiences.
And thank you for shouting out the and highlighting the history around womanism and feminism. And also, you're right. Like there is backlash happening internally within a lot of minority communities about, if the men and women fight against each other, what are we going to have? I'm sure you hear that rhetoric on the internet, and I think it's for the good of everyone. And until we recognize that, I don't know who said it. Was it Hillary Clinton that women's rights are human rights, and human rights are women's rights? Until we understand that, we're still going to be lost. It's for the good of everyone, and I think feminism, at its healthiest, at its best, is for the good of everyone. It is for the good of the community, and I think that we see all over the world. And you're probably familiar with this. When women are allowed to make more, the economic performance of the society increases significantly because they funnel that money into children, into education, into healthcare, into different aspects. And not to say that men don't do that, but I think as a woman, especially if a woman has empowered to be a mother or an advocate for other women, she's often seeing things from a different perspective. And that's why it's so important to have women in positions and seats of power, which I know your work entails a lot of that. Because when we get into those seats and positions of power, the tide changes because we're able to bring our perspective and advocate for the needs of the community as a whole. And I think that's something that's really special about women in positions of power. So I remember you talking about like your high school principal being a man who celebrated you as a woman and the women around you. And I think number one, like I know the work that you all do at Vital Voices, you all recognize male allies. And I love that because I think like men need to be celebrated. I remember when I first was learning about Vital Voices and I was like, oh, y'all recognize the men as well. Okay, cool. Because men need to be celebrated for championing women. And I've said it before in this podcast, the highest thing a man can do is champion women. That is the highest and greatest thing that a man can do in the world, because he's showing that he's evolved past his gender identity to see a woman as a human. So I really do love that. So how did like number one, like how was navigating high school as a young woman in Mexico? Like how was that? Or if you were in Mexico at the time or wherever you were at the time. And then how did your principal champion and celebrate women, and like what did he teach you about like the power of allyship for women?
Yeah. So I was already living in the US when I went to high school, but it was mostly I think maybe like over 90% of it were Latino immigrants. And it was a Catholic school, but I loved my high school. It is the place where I experienced my first community, and I learned what it means to be a member of a community, somebody where everybody counts. Yeah, my high school principal, he had a huge um, impact in creating that type of space. And yeah, I don't, and not just him, but I think he just stands out as somebody who I think saw a lot of potential in me and saw that I liked school. He noticed the things that I cared about, like I we didn't have recycling at our high school, and so I would like go around the garbage cans and like take out plastic bottles, and I would then like take them home and recycle them. And when he saw that, he said, "Oh well, okay. What if we get together and what if we like start a recycling program and you can help lead that?" And so I think he really saw those opportunities. Um, and then because I really liked school and I think he was an educator, he gave me a lot of advice when it came to applying to colleges. Um, he like was able to get me a scholarship to like study in Brown for a summer my junior year. So he was definitely just somebody that, yeah, just like really believed in me. And again, I think like as being a woman, and at that point being from an immigrant community, and that in a space where, I think sometimes our understanding of what is possible is just a lot smaller. And so what I'm so thankful for him and just that school in general was, um, it allowed me to dream and allowed me to realize that I could do more, right? That I could have an impact in my community, and that I could pursue these paths that otherwise would feel not available to me because of where I came from. And so I think having that as a young person was so valuable, because then I could go on, to college and continue to find and seek those type of mentors who continue to believe in me and give me opportunities. And honestly, like that is how the rest of my education went, and really how through my education and my teachers, I've been able to gain so many fellowships and scholarship opportunities, because otherwise I would not know about them. And it was really by having people like him believe in me and allowing me to dream like that.
I love that for you. Like, I love that you had somebody that saw and I just have to say it, like, I love that you had somebody that saw the leader in you and saw that early and, like, nurtured that potential, and then how powerful was it to be your principal? He understood the power that he had, and, not even just beyond even gender, like just being a leader and an administrator. Like when we go back, and a lot of us, when we look back on our lives, it was a teacher that first said, I see this in you. Like I see you being able to do these things and I want to empower you to do that. You spoke about even the educational programs, the fellowships, like what a blessing it is like that when these things opportunities come up you're thought about and people are like hey like you would be a great fit for that. I think that those are the things that we oftentimes are missing a lot of the time, especially as women, like just somebody to give us that push and be like, hey, like, I see you, you're able to do that. I'm sure you're familiar with the work that is done to empower girls to lead. And they talk about how, I think they said like from ages 8 to 13, like women's self esteem and confidence drop significantly. And at high school, it's such a sensitive time. Like, you might feel like you're a bit nerdy or you're not the cool girl or you're not, all of us go through those things in our mind when we're young. We overthink and sometimes we're not as confident, but I love that for you. Like, I love that you were surrounded by people that uplifted you in that, and I think that is wonderful. And I think that is beautiful. My experience was so different. So I also was a leader, but I was like, I faced the gender bias before I even knew it was gender bias. And I didn't have the language for it. Like I always was the young woman, like, meetings and elections. I was the girl running against the guy. Like I was, and I never had the language for it. But back then, a lot of people didn't see, because I was a woman, they didn't see me as being as capable as being a leader. So I love that for you. And that's why I was like, oh my God, I love that for Myra. Because I feel like many of us didn't get that. We didn't get that push. We got like, I remember one time I was doing something and my principal at the time, he looked at me and he was like, I don't know if don't know how to do things properly, but this is not the way that you do da 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 da. And I kept on thinking, like, I told my mom about it and she was like, he spoke to you like that because you're a woman. She's like, flat out. That's why he spoke to you because he wouldn't have spoken to any of the guys that way. And I was young in high school. I was student body president and I was a young girl. And I've always looked young for my age. So on top of that, at the time, I was no more than what, 5'3", 5'2". I wasn't taken serious. So it was a lot of me having to go through that. Like, I see myself as a leader, but other people don't see me as that. How do I reconcile that? But it's wonderful for you that the community uplifted you and saw that in you. And I think that's so important and a testament to the fact that we need to be poured into as humans. So that's wonderful. It's really, really wonderful.
I'm sorry that happened to you. I mean, definitely shows. I mean, I love that you didn't listen.
No,
Because
I
look at you
didn't listen
now.
because we can't listen though. You see what I'm saying? Like because we can't. Like one of my favorite quotes is like the woman that doesn't need validation is like the most powerful woman on the planet. And I printed that out and I put that like on everything. Like every vision board I have is like the woman who does not need validation is the most powerful woman on the planet. Cause I realized like if people can use whatever weaponry they'll use against powerful women, they do. You know, I'm sure you're familiar with some of the Vital Voices trustees, the hate that they get, you know, just for being themselves. And it's like, just leave them alone, leave them alone. But I think as women, we have to develop that, still be sensitive, but be strong, you know, sensitive yet strong. And I think that's what I've always tried to be. So thank you for that. So I want to ask you, like, I know you had this interest in sustainability and science, and we're still kind of on the high school thing. How did you eventually make the transition from the environment, and you talked about like recycling and different things you were involved in, from environmentalism into wanting to pursue your studies in the liberal arts?
Yeah, so I was really passionate about the environment. As I mentioned, you know, started the recycling program. And actually, when I first started college, um, I was like a part of this like eco community and like took a few classes. So I think it was more, I continued to take classes. I think what happened was that, as I mentioned earlier, my like world just kind of really expanded. And so I think before, when I was in high school, I saw the environment and issues around sustainability as just like the planet and animals and trees. And then you get to college, and I learned the environment is the place where humans live, learn, and play, along with animals and the planet and the trees. And so going back to again, it was like, oh, you know, women's issues intersect with sustainability and the environment, and in really interesting ways, actually. I mean, the fact that, um, you know, communities of color in the US tend to be the ones that are exposed more to, um, you know, power plants and toxins, the fact that women's bodies, um, and especially, you know, or just like bodies that have children, like that gets, you know, impacts of the environment are seen in the placenta, like just all types of issues. So I think it more morphed into my interest in general around women's rights. So instead of just focusing on sustainability, like in itself, it just integrated into these larger concerns around, yeah, just kind of women and like social issues.
It's funny that you're bringing that up because I literally had that conversation with my dad. So he worked in environmentalism for years, and he talked about, he told me like sustainability is so much more than the environment. Like it actually is everything. It encompasses everything. And I'm glad you were able to see like, not to be limited by the environmental interest, but to see it as a broader landscape through which to gain inspiration or even to find ways to advocate. I'm sure you're hearing about like the intersectional environmentalist, even some organizations like Queer Brown Vegan. And I have a lot of friends in the sustainability space, so I'm familiar, or Black Girl Environmentalist. Like, I think sustainability is expanding to include our identities and how we show up in different spaces. So it's funny that you made that connection years ago, because I think we're just starting to like see a crop of organizations being built around that, when it's like that's always been the truth. Sustainability has always been about everything. The UN has led the way with like the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and show us the many different ways through which sustainability can occur. So I'm grateful that you had that foresight to know that back then, because I feel like a lot of us are just starting to catch up and just starting to realize and recognize that. So I want to get into you going to Swarthmore, because that, number one, that's a great school. That is a great school. But also like, you know, like the liberal arts haven, like you know, it's like a fantasy school for a lot of people. So I know that you attended Swarthmore, and you were on this path to pursue a PhD. What was a shift for you when you realized that maybe like a PhD right now wasn't the path for you? I want to preface this question by saying we have a lot of listeners that are on that liberal arts path, and unfortunately, they're told a PhD is what you should do. That's the only way you're employable. That's the only way. They're kind of given a lot of like job fodder around that. I know a lot of people study African studies and, you know, different things and listen to this podcast. And they've been told, yeah, you know, the only way you're going to get a job is if you have a PhD. So, how were you able to know like the PhD wasn't a right now or like an immediate like path for you after undergrad?
Eh, I loved Swarthmore, by the way, and it ended up being a really great fit for me. I had never even considered I don't think I knew what graduate school was, much less a PhD, until I went to Swarthmore. And similarly, I had professors that nominated me for the Mellon Mace Fellowship, which in summary is a fellowship program. Is an initiative trying to get more students of color to enter academia because it is still very difficult. And through that, I was paired with a mentor. I received funding and training for research, and I really enjoyed and liked the process. So I did end up considering it as oh, maybe this is something that I can do. Like I like research and life in academia can be very fulfilling, especially if you're someone who's very passionate about a certain topic, right? Like gender studies or African studies. And if you enjoy writing and just kind of doing your own thing. But I always, on one hand, I was always a little nervous of like, oh, what does it mean to write books that my mom will not be able to read and understand? Or what does it mean to, spend my time like mostly like in a library forever and then have very little interaction with actually the communities that I care about. So I think I always had that sort of in the back of my mind of, I'm not totally sure if this is the right approach for me. Um, but it really wasn't until, so after Swarthmore, I did a fellowship and then I went to graduate school and I was doing a 1 year's master's in gender studies. And it was there that um, I kind of realized, yeah, maybe this isn't for me. Like I missed interacting more with people. Like I realized that what I really loved was the educating piece, like, sharing with others what I knew and having that interaction with them. But the landscape now of a PhD and especially in academia is there are very little positions that are like good faculty positions. And in order to get there, you have to really devote a lot of time to publishing and being very successful in terms of, yeah, just it's like publish or perish. And so I just felt, yeah, maybe this isn't for me. And also, it's about realizing your work style. I think that I was not able to disconnect very well when I was a student, like when I was working and when I was off. Like I was just always working because it's just, you're a student, it just never ends. You can always read more books, you can always do more research. So it was also just not very good for me in terms of, yeah, I think I was just like too obsessive and like I couldn't create that distinction that like a more structured workplace did. So I I just put it on the back burner. Like I think it may still be something that could be fun to do, but I definitely just decided to try to figure out other ways that I could um, do the work that I wanted to do, which at that point was just connect with women and really learn about the work that they're doing and support the initiatives that they're doing. So I thought, let me go to the place where women are and support what they're doing and go from there.
The reason why I asked that question is because that is the parallel between your path and my path. A lot of people, let me not say a lot, I got the feedback of like, you should do that. You should go into academia. You should teach. You should, and I think like, how it can be in school. You write one good paper and people are just pushing you to become a professor, or, you show a little critical thinking and people are pushing you to become a professor. And I can only imagine, like, because the way that you're articulating these concepts right now, how people were probably like, we see Myra being the next professor, being the next scholar in this area. And I'm glad you understood it's not about pleasing people. It's more so about where do I feel most fulfilled and how can I take my skills and bring them to an environment that I think energizes me. Because especially when you're out of college, I can only imagine like locking yourself into academia. And I love school. But like you, I've pushed that back because I always say like academia is my end game. Like of course I want to do that. But right now I think I want to get the real life experiences. And I'm like, wow, like you're speaking to my soul. Cause I be saying that too. Like I want to get the real life experiences to ground me when I do decide to take that path because I've seen it play out, and I think different strokes for different folks, but I feel like the process that you went through is what a lot of people are going through. And even some people that go into the PhD program and they leave. You probably hear about people who do that. It's because something just isn't connecting. And like you said, like the publish or perish, that culture can definitely put a lot of pressure on you to perform a certain way. And even when you have mentors that you look up to and that you want to please, yeah, I could. Did you ever feel the pressure to like go to be the cool professor? Like people would probably be like, "Oh, you'd be like such a cool professor," because academia is not seen as being cool, And I think they also like they push people to join academia that they think can bring a youthful perspective. But unfortunately, what often happens is you get in there and you feel stripped of your youth, you feel stripped of your energy, you feel stripped of you're in the ivory tower, literally, and it's not for everybody in their 20s. It's just not. And I think we have to kind of normalize that a bit more. But did you ever feel the pressure to like be the young professor, or you never felt that pressure?
No, not so much. I mean, because if anything, I think what I heard a lot from my mentors was, um, even if your interest is gender studies or women's rights, your PhD should not be in that. Your PhD should be in a traditional, in a marketable degree. So you should go into sociology, is what they would say. So it was more already around, like already it was really limiting, like my approach. So it was like to even get to the door, you need to have a marketable degree. You need to be able to teach, sociology or anthropology courses along with feminist studies. And this is more of like, I mean, I appreciate it. They were being strategic and telling me how it works. But no, if anything, I think that was my first inkling of like, okay, I don't know if you know this is super appealing. Um, but now, I mean, I think around this time, a lot of my friends that did pursue academia, they are getting their degrees like right now. And so now is I've sometimes have this reflection of like, oh my gosh, like, they have, it feels like they have this meaningful thing of like, I did it, I accomplished it. And sometimes I think, oh, where am I? Or what am I doing? So I think if anything is more of that of, oh, they did it and I didn't. But it's fine, it has to be a reminder of like, no, this I made this choice for a reason and that's okay.
Yeah, this is a great segue for us to get into like your work that you do with Vital Voices and how transformative that is. I feel like we look at other people's lives and we're like, oh my God, they have this, but people are looking at you and they're saying like, hey, Myra has the cool job, like, she's out here doing the stuff and actually living what is being studied. So I always say like we work in and live in ecosystems, and your goal is to find your perfect fit within the ecosystem. And even me, like when I decided to become an entrepreneur, people were surprised because a lot of people were like, well, you seem to be someone who wants to learn, teach, write. And of course I want to do that, but I also wanted to build. Like I wanted to get my hands dirty. And I think a lot of people couldn't understand that because sometimes the language that other people use to describe us becomes what we begin to see ourselves as. And I was like, okay, well, I just fit into this one box, but we don't fit into a box. And I think you just decided to take the scenic route, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think sometimes we have to encourage ourselves. That's me too. Like I started this podcast because I woke up one day and I was everything for my business. I was the, secretary, the trash person, the I was everything for my business, sales, everything. And I was like, I don't feel professional at all. What's going on here? I feel like this is messy, like, this is dirty, like, every time I have to do something, it's me. I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, "I'm a purposeful professional. I don't have a white collar job like you. Many of my peers went, I went to University of Pennsylvania, so I was exposed to all the top jobs. And I was just telling my mom the other day, I was like, I see people making bank. Like they're out there like making bank and they're living life and they're living. And I was like, dang, like, what am I doing? But I think I had to recognize in those moments, you got to go back to like, why do I do what I do? I always feel like sometimes life can seem like the tortoise and the hare. Like it can feel like everybody is running past you. But I think that when you focus on your own path, you will get to the destination. And I'm telling this to the people on the podcast, literally, like I was crying about this yesterday. So I'm coming off of like fresh emotion of like, I was crying about where's my life going? Why did I not reach this? Da 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 da. That was crying about that yesterday. I gotta keep it real. Like I was not happy yesterday. But I think like in moments like this, what you're telling me is reinforcing to me, um, our path is our path. And like it's never gonna make sense to anyone but us. And it doesn't have to make sense to anyone but us. That's wonderful and that's beautiful. And that's the freedom that I think we all should have. Okay. So let's get into this Vital Voices work. Let's get into this Vital Voices work. So tell us about the work that you do with Vital Voices today and like how does it feel to be a part of such a global and powerful movement to empower women of all backgrounds?
Yeah, well, so I support the Visionaries program at Vital Voices, and this is a 7 week long virtual leadership course for women who are either entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, or have an idea to launch an initiative in the future. So it really is all encompassing. And I think the strength of this program is that it brings really ambitious women like you who have that personal drive to live the type of lives that they want, that are different from those around them, um, but who are really invested in their communities and in bringing positive change. And so, what's great is that during those 7 weeks, it brings together women not only to work on their personal self development, but to build community. And I think that has been maybe the biggest lessons, um, is realizing how valuable these communities still are. Even just, like I'm always so shocked to have so many of our participants, and maybe you can attest to this, who say, this is the first time I've been in a room with other women who are like me, who are different, who have different goals, who are, yeah, like gave up, this very successful career to pivot and start a new business for themselves. Or I think also something that comes up a lot is women that have experienced a lot of discrimination or backlash from peers, from colleagues, even their families, just because they're a woman. And this is also another space where it's the first time where they feel seen, that they can be themselves and they can celebrate one another. And so it's been really beautiful, I think, to be a part of that. And the program is 7 weeks long, but then there's an opportunity to do an in-person program. And in general, we say that all of you now enter this larger Vital Voices network. And so it's great to continue to see how the different women that go through not just this program, but other programs offered by Vital Voices continue to help each other, collaborate with one another, and even just see your own trajectories and things that you accomplish, grants that you win. It's just great. It's great to see you go through that. And I mean, I've mentioned now a couple of times already, but I've gone through a lot of fellowships myself, and it was those fellowships that completely transformed my life. It led me to enter this women's leadership space. So it's been really rewarding for me in so many ways. And now being in a position where now I get to be on the other side of investing in other women and helping all of you connect through this platform. And um, yeah, just to create those opportunities for all of you to do the things that you want to accomplish for your communities.
I feel like Vital Voices is heard around the world. So I was at another social entrepreneurship accelerator, and someone asked me about the Visionaries program. I was actually at the Watson Institute, and she was like, "Oh, you're doing Visionaries? Can I sit down with you and you can read like my application?" And I was like, "Who's does this girl know about Visionaries?" Like she's from like I don't want to say rural California, but she's from like a small town in California. And even she knew about Visionaries and wanted to be a part of it and also wanted to be a part of I think the program would start Stuart Wiseman as well. Like there was another program she talked to me about, and we sat down and we talked about it. And I was like, wow, like this is so powerful because I had never even stepped foot in the Zoom call yet because I think my cohort it wasn't the time yet. I was in July. I was in Colorado, and I was like, wow, people are talking about this already. What type of experience am I going to have? And then I log on for the first session, and it's powerful. Like I'm like, wow, this is crazy because many of us the other women's spaces, number one, have shut out women that I got to keep it real, look like me. We're not invited. So to see the diversity of women was just astounding. And I think like that's something that immediately made me feel welcome. So congratulations for even being a part of the vision behind that because even seeing the diversity on the call, I mean, it was women from all over the world. That's so powerful. And everybody I've met from Vital Voices, what really sets apart that community from other communities is the way that people willingly share. Like, I think like that in some other communities, I was a sharer, like always like, here's a grant, here's a, but like there are people beating me. I don't even share with Vital Voices. I can just receive and sit and receive and give it to my other network. Like, I can just receive because there's so much love that's coming through. And people would kind of wonder, they're like, a virtual program is going to build so much love. But I think like there's so much love that has come through. There's friendships that I've made with people across the world because we see things the same way. Like it's just crazy to me. And I think like that's a testament to you might not know this, but I feel like I have to tell you this that you are in your purpose, even if you feel like you're not, because if you're behind that movement that has blessed so many people, like I'm hearing nothing but good things about like the Washington summit, being a part of that is powerful and you are definitely needed in that space because I've never seen there's a couple programs that I've been to and I've never seen anyone do it like Visionaries did. Because oftentimes when we get women together in the room, it's like, I don't like her because I don't like her. Even over the Zoom room, it's like, you don't like her because you don't like her. What? Why all this negativity? It's just, it's positivity and it's support and it's so many things that I think like you're needed in that space because I feel like you play such a vital role in that. So I just wanted to give you that and thank you for that work because it's changing lives and I think that's really what this podcast is about.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you had such a positive experience. I really think it's all of you. This would not work if all of you were not showing up like that and just open and wanting to be engaged. I mean, you never know with Zoom, like it can be a little awkward popping into a virtual space with 50 strangers and pouring your heart out, but all of you did that. So yeah, I really think it's just it's all of you are what make it happen. But I'm glad that you've had a good experience, and I mean, we consider ourselves very lucky that you were in that space. You were one of the most memorable participants. You always had really insightful perspectives and ways to challenge the group. So I really appreciated having you there.
I appreciate being appreciated for that because sometimes that is what I try. Not even sometimes. That is what I try to bring to spaces, but everyone doesn't necessarily that's not always welcome. Like sometimes bringing the insight isn't always welcome, but I love how you all also held space for so many different types of women from like different personalities to even people who English is not their first language. Like that's so powerful because it's oftentimes the same people always in the spotlight and I loved learning from so many of the women in the cohort. And it's powerful. Like I got to get on the hub because like I'm there, but I'm not really there. I need to be on the hub, but it's because we have such an active WhatsApp group. Like there's so many active WhatsApp groups that have stemmed from this one group. It's crazy. It's like it's I'm like this is what it feels like to be in a community where there is love you know and I think that's so wonderful. So my last question for you is I feel like you have so much aspirations to do things even bigger than what you're doing now. And I sometimes it's like when I look at my life, I'm like, could it be bigger? Yes, it could be bigger. And I always tell people, like, it can be bigger. Like, what we're doing now, oftentimes, is the seed for what will become a tree in the future. So, like, with a background in both gender based violence and women's leadership facilitation, how do you envision your impact, like, spreading beyond vital voices one day?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious too. I think, what my sort of untraditional path, like for context, I think I shared with you, Vital Voices is kind of the first job I've had in the US. I've mostly worked abroad. Um, and so just based on that, I mean, I would love to go abroad again. I think there's a lot of opportunities for me to continue learning from other communities and other spaces. Um, and learning from all of you through the Visionaries program, participants like you who are entrepreneurs and nonprofit leaders, it's introduced a lot of things that I had just never thought about in the past, like how to connect women with more funding opportunities. So I think the philanthropy space is really interesting, and has a lot of potential. As I mentioned, I mean, now uh, I wouldn't consider VV like a full-on fellowship. It's definitely more of a leadership program, but um, I would love to also um, continue to just share more like actual fellowship opportunities that have really large investments in just women's development. Like I was able to study abroad and also, work in Asia through different fellowship opportunities. And I love sharing with, um, young, students or just anybody who ever asks me to share about the application process and how to like travel abroad and work abroad. Like I mentioned, they really changed my life, and so I also would love to just find a way to enter that space and make it more accessible. Um, have more people and more women, right, to again continue to to dream big and to actually pursue the things that they want. I think it's even now, I've been meeting a lot of just different friends or different colleagues who share that, oh, they really wish that they could travel to this country, or they really wish that they could travel to that country, but they're scared to travel alone. And I'm like, just do it. I traveled alone for 1 year. It changed my life completely. And I think there's just like still a lot of limitations and things that we, there are scripts that we tell about ourselves. And I think it'd be great to just be somebody that can be encouraging and empower women to continue to pursue these different paths, right? Whether it's still in this leadership space or more in a even just a personal development space or a I just want to travel and do something that scares me. Um, I think that yeah, those are the things that are kind of just exciting to me at the moment.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is so amazing. And I think you're right about like women waiting for permission. You probably see that a lot. Like, oh, I'm waiting for permission to just travel. I'm waiting for the right time. I'm waiting. I don't have this or I don't have that. And you're right. Like a lot of like when we grow in life, like a lot of that is like us just jumping and not worrying about the details. And one of the things that I really do see for you. I see you in the philanthropy space, and I feel like you can be such a force in the space because of the fact that you started at the level of doing the leadership programs, and because of the fact that you understand the stories behind the women who need the funding. Like a lot of people, I always say, like in the funding space, we have people who, they own the funding vehicle. So they are, the families, the donor advised funds, like the families that put money in the foundation, et cetera. But they're not always the people that understand what's happening at the ground and understand what it looks like for someone to need funding to carry out this thing, or even what impact can look like in the early stage. That's really hard, especially as an entrepreneur, to define impact in the early stage of your venture is very, very hard, because sometimes the potential potential isn't always as a parent, but I think your background in working with founders of varying, I believe even there were some people who came to Vital Voices with a business idea. They didn't start their business yet. So you're seeing the different stages. That's powerful because when you do get to that level, rooting for you to get to that level, and I see it for you. When you do get to that level, you can be such a force because you understand it from all sides. And then you have the feminists, like understanding the gender studies, women's studies, understanding as well, which I think is often lacking in these spaces. Because I interact with funders, and as a founder, sometimes you feel like they don't understand you, even when they're well intentioned. It's like, where can I really feel understood? And I think in philanthropy, there's a need for people who really do understand the narratives and where we're coming from. And oftentimes, like the cross we bear as women entrepreneurs, especially those of us who are women of color, like, people who can understand that and empathize with that and be able to just surround us with and envelope us with the support that we need, because I think that that's a common theme that we have on this podcast of founders needing support and where that support can come from. So I really really do love that. All right, so this was a wonderful 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 conversation. I think this was such a great opportunity for you to not only share more of your story. I know a lot of people will probably love to listen to this because you really did share a lot of yourself, but also was opportunity for me to learn from you, from your knowledge in this domain, the domains and the spaces that you're in, and also be inspired because I feel like with people like you in the future of and the presence of women's leadership development, even women's philanthropy, I know that we're coming a better futures on the horizon, especially for women founders and women advocates like myself. So I'm very grateful for the work that you do. And I just want to end this by saying thank you so much. Thank you. I'm grateful.
No, thank you, Sarah, and for being so vulnerable as well and sharing your story with me. And even just for giving me this opportunity. As I mentioned earlier, it's great that I get to be on the other side and that I get to see in action the work that you do. And I knew already how incredible of a speaker you were, but I felt so heard and understood by you and you reflecting a lot of the things back to me and adding to my thoughts. So I had so much fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I really do love this. So my last question, my very very last question, I ask every single guest is to repeat after me, right? So you're gonna say your name, right? So I always say, my name is Soraya, and I'm a purposeful professional because I pursue equity and inclusion in everything that I do. Right. So I want you to repeat after me. My name is, and I'm a purposeful professional because.
So, my name is Mayra, and I am a purposeful professional because I empower women to pursue their dreams and to find the freedom that they crave.
All right. Thank you, y'all. All right. We're done with another episode. Take care. I want to thank Mayra for her thoughtfulness in discussing these topics relevant to women, as well as sharing these pockets of her own story. We started with that amazing opening conversation about Shakira and Barbie movie feminism, to what it truly means to be a woman that champions all women in today's society. Mayra, the work that you do is admirable and needs to be highlighted. Thank you for sharing your story, your passion, and your wisdom with the podcast. We wish you all the best in your endeavors and know that your next chapter, whatever it will be great. You are destined for greatness, and we believe that. For the women whose lives you have touched, which are so many, we say thank you, and we salute you. Anyway, this is Soraya, and we're out with the podcast for the people, your career, and the culture. Peace. We're out.